I was basically asleep, and then this notification comes through, and I honestly thought it was fake. I'm sure plenty of you guys thought the same thing. There was just no, I thought James's account was hacked. Karl Anthony Towns has been sent to the New York Knicks. I made a video 2 days ago talking about the Knicks, talking about the center problem that they had, talking about the fact that Julius Randle could be a possible trade piece. I've done multiple videos on that this offseason, but by the time we got to basically October, training camp is about to start, I thought that all of the big trades were over. The possibility of Karl Anthony Towns ending up on the Knicks was a real thing in the middle of the year, but now he is in New York as of today. The trade is Julius Randle, Donte DiVincenzo, and a first-round pick to Minnesota in exchange for Karl Anthony Towns. There's about 100 different directions to go in here. I'm going to begin with the New York Knicks. Like I said, I've made videos recently about the big man problem for the Knicks. They made all these moves over the last couple of years, even going back to bringing in Jalen Brunson, OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Donte DiVincenzo, Josh Hart. All the stuff on the perimeter was great, but they needed another big, especially after losing Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Mitchell Robinson's injury news broke like a few days ago, which is why I made this video right here that references a lot of what happens with this trade. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Knicks got a little bit more desperate to potentially bring in Karl Anthony Towns. From the Minnesota perspective, we'll get to in a second, but for them, it's very clear that they felt this was a real issue, that they had an opportunity to turn Julius Randle plus another rotation player in Donte DiVincenzo into a really good fit for them at the 5 spot. This allows the Knicks to play Brunson and a couple of the wings, Bridges, OG, Josh Hart, a handful of guys, and then have Karl Anthony Towns in there at the 5, or maybe play him at the 4 alongside Mitchell Robinson, which is a possibility that we talked about in that video the other day. And for them, it makes a ton of sense. There was always a swap here of Julius Randle in exchange for Karl Anthony Towns that made a lot of sense for the Knicks as they push for what they hope will be a championship contending season. And presumably, certainly while we're waiting for Mitchell Robinson to come back and potentially for the entire season, Karl Anthony Towns is going to go back to being a full-time 5. They did the 2 big men experiment in Minnesota and it worked. Like, that's one of the craziest parts about this, is that Minnesota was in the conference finals a couple of months ago. Again, we'll get to them here in a second, but he's going to go back to being a full-time 5, really going to space the floor, and for the Knicks, more than anything, provides a body type that they just didn't have on their roster. Like, Mitchell Robinson's tall, but he's not a big guy. And Cat, although he's viewed as this like finesse kind of player, at times in the structure that Minnesota put him in, he was the primary big man defender in the post while Rudy kind of roamed and protected the rim. And so he provides a body type that the Knicks desperately needed, and the Knicks have a roster construction that can really well insulate some of the difficulties that Karl Anthony Towns can have on the defensive end of the floor as well, because of all these wings, Mikal Bridges, OG, Brunson, and whoever else the other, the 5th starter is. All of that stuff works really well together. But quite frankly, I'm shocked that they made the move for 2 reasons. One, we're basically at training camp. They've been talking all offseason about the fact that Julius Randle's ready to play whatever role they need him to. Tibbs just gave an interview like less than a week ago talking about playing Julius Randle at the 5 more, which is something that he'd been hesitant to do in the past. And they broke up the Villanova guys. I'm actually kind of upset for Donte DiVincenzo, because if you think about the situation that he was in this offseason, Bridges, Hart, Brunson, and himself, all those guys are there. It's a dream scenario. You never get to play with a group of guys you had so much success with in college. That never happens in the NBA, and Bridges was like the last piece of that. And now he's just gone. And it's a great example of the fact that the NBA is truly a business. DiVincenzo is going to be a piece that the Knicks are going to miss, especially because his floor spacing obviously was a bit more of a luxury going into this year than he was last year, just because they've added more wings. They added OG midseason. They added Mikal Bridges. But I'm genuinely shocked. Whether I like the trade for the Knicks or not is irrelevant at this point. I'll talk about that later. But I am very, very surprised in terms of the timing and in terms of the pieces moved. For Minnesota, it might be even more surprising because, like I said, they were in the conference finals a few months ago, and maybe your perspective of Minnesota has changed a little bit, but it's really important to point out that they've never had playoff success unless Kevin Garnett's on the roster until literally last season. Like, they made the playoffs once when Jimmy Butler was there, and other than that, prior to the Anthony Edwards era, they'd never had postseason success, never been to the postseason unless Kevin Garnett is on the roster. So for this franchise to make the conference finals and a few months later trade away, whatever you may think about Karl Anthony Towns, trade away a pivotal piece of the team that got them to the conference finals is completely shocking. The timing of it, the concept of the deal in the first place, I was so surprised. And this is a team that clearly was gearing up for another run to potentially make the finals. They have Anthony Edwards, the rising American-born star in the league right now. They made an aggressive move to trade up in the draft to grab Dillingham in the draft, and it seemed like a roster that was going to work and function very similar to the roster they had last year. And Cat was a piece that was always kind of rumored to potentially be on the move if they did need to make a trade, and the Knicks were always a destination. But I can't overstate how surprising it is that a team that has had such a lack of success historically makes this dramatic of a move right after one of the most successful seasons ever. And that to me means that a lot of this was money motivated. One of the reasons that Cat has been thrown out as the guy to possibly get moved is because when they traded for Rudy Gobert, it became clear that this was going to be an extremely expensive roster. They re-signed McDaniels, of course. Ant gets a big max. Cat's on a max. Gobert's on close to a max. And those four guys together, financially, it was never going to work long term. It could have worked this year, but then beyond that, it was always going to be a little bit questionable. And I think it's certainly a big part of this deal that one of the main pieces they're getting back, Julius Randle, is not going to be on the payroll at the end of the year. He's a 2025 free agent, whether they give him an extension or otherwise. He's cheaper currently than Cat, and if they re-sign him, would be cheaper on into the future as well. And I'm not saying that Minnesota didn't like the deal. I'm not saying that they made the trade exclusively for money, but I do think it was a significant part of it because on paper, there is no reason for Minnesota to trade away Karl Anthony Towns when they just had as successful of a season as they did. There's no reason for them to shake things up when at times during the regular season and the postseason last year, they looked like the best team in the entire conference. Now, that's not to say that I dislike the trade really for either team. I think Cat provides a level of spacing and, as I said, a body type that's going to be really beneficial to the Knicks. And offensively, there's going to be a lot of good stuff there. It's interesting that it's Cat because he doesn't really seem like a Tibbs guy. Doesn't really seem like someone that's going to fit the play style that Tibbs either wants to play or the kind of aggressiveness and the work ethic that he typically wants from his players. That seems like an interesting fit to me. And for Minnesota, I totally understand getting out from under the Cat contract financially. I understand how Julius Randle and Donte DiVincenzo help your team this season, and you still have Ant, and you're preparing for this kind of longer-term vision of your team. We just don't really get deals like this. These are two teams that view themselves as top-tier contenders, trading significant pieces of their teams right before training camp is supposed to start. If I had to give a grade to each, for Minnesota, I would go right around in that B to B plus range, somewhere in there because of the financial benefits, because DiVincenzo was going to be a key rotation player for them, someone that they really need from a floor spacing perspective. And there's a scenario where with Julius Randle in place of Karl Anthony Towns, they are a better team this year. That is a real possibility. For the Knicks, I'm going to give them an A. I really like the talent upgrade. I like the stability that Cap provides at that spot. They were going to struggle to fill the void of what Isaiah Hartenstein provided for them with any kind of other trade or free agency acquisition. It was always going to be difficult for them to really fix that spot on their roster. And when you're looking at the rest of the conference and the rest of the league, you're looking at the Celtics with KP, you're looking at Embiid and Philly, you're looking at potentially Jokic and Anthony Davis, these guys in the Western Conference, if you were to make it to the finals, that was going to be a problem for them all season long. The Randall thing was going to be weird for them all season long because he's an impending free agent. He's on the outside looking in of the Villanova connection. I totally get the deal for the Knicks, and I think I like it a little bit better for them even than I do for Minnesota. I totally get why each team did it. I'm just so completely shocked that this happened.